Good afternoon to you all, to our learning community this afternoon. It's lovely to see you joining us this afternoon. My name is Mark Cowling. I work for Gather Movements along with a small core team. Kay Greaves is on the call with me from Gather today, and we'll be organising some of our visuals. We are recording the session so that we can share it more widely. And we'd love you just to put the area that you've come from next to your name so that we get a feel of which areas you're working in, living in. That would be great. So our theme today is on collaboration, and we're thinking about church unity movements. Gather Movement is all about supporting church unity that seeks the transformation of places that we live and work in, socially, culturally, and spiritually. And this little hexagon, if you can see this, shows the 6 foundations that we've observed that enable unity movements to flourish. And so we're really delighted to have Paul Woodman from Love Southampton, a church leader in Southampton, to come and share with us how we do collaboration. Just before we get into that, a definition from our little hexagon picture here. Collaboration is about the church working in collaboration with the civic authorities, charity leaders, sphere leaders, and prayer leaders. We saw some fantastic collaboration going on during the pandemic, and subsequently that with the cost of living crisis. I'll give you one example from Leeds here. On the 18th of March, 2 days after the Prime Minister announced the restrictions, the COVID restrictions in the UK, 30 people from the council, the Food Action Network, Trussell Trust, Faith Share, Yorkshire, Rethink Food, Voluntary Action Leeds, the Leeds Community Foundation, all gathered together on Skype to plan how they would revamp the existing food part of the welfare support scheme for the whole local authority, the City Council, and share information on existing provision. And over the next 6 months, they dealt with 25,000 referrals for food and other support that was required. And what a fast response happened during the pandemic that was necessary. And I think we think as churches, there's an opportunity to build on some of the collaboration that we did and we learnt about and were inspired to be ambitious about. And so Paul is going to help us think about how we do collaboration going forward. Before I hand over to him, we'd like to just start with an opening prayer. So let me just lead us in prayer. Lord Jesus, on this St. Valentine's Day, we come before you with our prayers, and we rejoice in the wonder and power of your never-ending love for us and our love for you. And we now read from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians that love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. And we pray you'll teach us to collaborate today, and that through collaborating, we will experience greater wholeness for ourselves and for those we serve. Bless the work we do together so that an abundant harvest of your love, justice, and peace will be known by all. Amen. If you would like a copy of that 6 foundations, I will put a link in the chat in a second, which you can download that chart with, along with some questions to help you do an audit of how unity is going in your Church Unity Movement network. But without further ado, Paul, can I hand over to you just to share with us, if you would introduce yourself and then share something about the Cost of Living Summit, which was this just spectacular example of cross-sector collaboration for us. Thanks, Paul.
Great, thanks, Mark. Nice to see you all, some familiar faces, so nice to see you again. Do pray for us in Southampton. We're bottom of the Football League and without a manager, so many problems the city's facing. I'm kidding. Yeah, I was asked just to give a little bit of a story around the Southampton unity, and particularly some of the work we've done with our local authority. It was 10 years ago in January that we created Love Southampton. And with Love Southampton, we particularly focused that around children's services at that point, which had a huge deficit, a huge cut 10 years ago. And services such as youth services were all cut immediately, that year in Southampton, along with family support work and a big crisis around foster carers. And so in 2013, we launched different campaigns. One was Families for 40, which helped with it links very closely with the Home for Good initiative that Krish Kandai took forward. And then also we took over a number of youth centres in the city that the church ran instead of the youth. And some great examples in there where city council youth centres would maybe open an hour or two a week, and now are open through the church. They're open every day of the week, from early in the morning through to the evening. So like a real transformation of those spaces. So I think we delivered some things really well. Our fostering campaign was strong. I remember coming up to some of your cities and sharing about how we've done that in Southampton, and Krish talked about it everywhere he went for the next 5 or 6 years. So that was our formation, and in some guise or other, we've had Love Southampton there behind things. And one of the things we've done a lot on over the last 5 years is rough sleeping. So looking at the rough sleeping side of things with the local authorities. So our numbers aren't huge. Probably we're up to about 29 people sleeping rough in 2018. And I didn't actually pick this thing. My friend Billy Kennedy, who some of you will know, him and I put together a bid for a new primary school in town, and there was a gap at that point where charities like ours could bid to open up new schools. So we sat down in his lounge one afternoon and bid for a new primary school, and we've got it. So we've opened this new primary school in the centre of town, and it caused a little bit of a stir. Not all these new Christian things always seem to create the same stir, but we met with the council leader and we talked this through, that like so often there's gaps, in terms of education or different problems that the city have. And what happens is a report goes out, a presentation is made about that problem, but it's never the case that people are just drawn together to talk in a circle about the problem and different solutions that might come from different charities or places, which is the way that things often get solved. That it's a charity down the road that makes initiative rather than the local authority now, especially as the local authority was shrinking. And so we said, it was a good thing with the school. It was people like Billy and I that bid for the school, because any nutter could have bid for the school, but you're lucky it was Billy and I. He didn't seem to agree, but no, he did. So he supported us finding land for that school, and we've got that piece of land now. But then we said to him, well, look, choose another topic and we'll come together in more of a round table sense, looking at it from a strategic point of view where everyone's got their say, and it's not that the council in charge and everyone else listens to their presentations. And so after a little bit of thinking, he decided and came back to us with rough sleeping. He'd like to talk about rough sleeping. And so we set up a conference the following year around, we called it Beds, Begging and Business. And then because people sometimes are homeless and they're begging, sometimes they're homeless and they're not begging, sometimes they're begging, some people are begging, but they're not homeless. They're just making money doing that. And so there's a whole load of different situations that a person might be in. But we certainly had nearly 30 people who were out rough sleeping at that time. So we got everyone together in January 18, and we locked in for 24 hours that we would be working together on this problem. We went home to sleep at night. But we spent the afternoon, evening, and then the next morning together, and spent much of that time listening to everyone's point of view. So the police spoke, churches spoke, council spoke. And at the end of it, there was a lot of frustration because we weren't allowing debate at that point. We were just into a listening cycle that people had. And then in the morning, after people had thought about what they heard, we went into action circles and created action plans around things like move on accommodation, churches winter shelter that never happened in Southampton before, container homes, etc. There were a whole load of initiatives that happened. And then we set targets on all of those things that we'd said. A new website was another thing that we talked about. And then in 3 months' time, we'd come back for an accountability meeting. And the amazing thing was, because there was so much energy in the room. People had given up their weekend or half their weekend to be there. That all the things that we said we'd do, we got done in that year. So we talked about container homes for a year, and now that they were up and running within a year. So these shipping containers converted into flats. The church's winter shelter opened the following year. Move on accommodation stepped up a gear. A new website and app was created in 3 months. A ton of energy. And so it's formed around Love Southampton. Then we built upon that with the street support network, which is around in the country as well. And it went well. So that was our format. And the next time we've used it is just this last year. So we offered to run a cost of living summit in October. And it was one of those things where I'd got some money from Department for Levelling Up, which was, it was really for post-COVID recovery, because Southampton, although it's in the South Coast, its stats are worse than Leeds and Sheffield. So our deprivation stats are quite poor. So we had some money to help the city through that time. And then with a bit of like quickness of thought, we thought no one was really going to come to something that's called post-COVID recovery, but everyone was talking about cost of living. So with like a little bit of deftness, we changed what we were going to do to a cost of living summit, offered to run that for the council. So we wrote to like the second in charge of our officers in the council, and she wrote back straight away and said, "Oh, that's interesting, because the chief exec's just been told by the council leader to run a cost of living summit. So your timing couldn't be better." So probably every chief exec in the country been told to run a cost of living summit at that point in the summer. So we said, well, look, we've got budget. We can run it ourselves and then have you come as speakers. So we followed the same sort of format as 2018, where the first half of the day was listening to presentations. So it does create like a bit of frustration because you really want to give your point of view, but there's a reason why we did that. But we had presentations. Then we brought in facilitators from a group called City to City, who are Christian guys, and they helped to facilitate discussion, bring people to action points by the end of the day. And then again, we set a 3-month accountability date. So it was January 13th, so 3 months on from when we met, for everyone to report back on what they've done. And again, just massive progress in terms of the food programs, warm spaces. So we had over 60 warm spaces launch in that 3-month period. And it was a real jolt as well. I think calling it a summit is a good thing. So you're trying to say to people, we're not just coming together to talk. You really want action out of the end of it. So my 3 things, I think this is my opening talk at the conference, was basically the 3 challenges you've got is 1, getting people to turn up. So will people show up for this thing? And obviously, if you've got a lot of speakers and you've got some good subject, then people will hopefully show up. So our speakers weren't just church people; they were Citizens Advice, some of the youth charities, some big names in our situation here in Southampton. And then you have the chief exec speak, would invite the MPs and so on. So you've got a good mix of people, but it sold out really quickly. So that was the first challenge, get everyone in the room. The second one is make sure that everyone doesn't just argue, because with something like cost of living, you could just score points politically, can't you? On all sorts of manners, like right versus left, or even from all sorts of angles. So there was a lot of time spent just meeting up one-to-one with some of the politicians and just saying what we want to get out of this is a community response, not just like scoring points against the Conservatives or Labour, and trying to build that sort of common sense. And they're pretty good actually in Southampton. So our Labour leader, council leader, is Labour, but she didn't score any points politically when she gave a keynote of this thing. So she very much talked about everyone playing their part in what was a unique sort of situation for us to be facing together. So that's the second thing, is you don't want everyone arguing. And that's why we didn't want people just putting up hands, asking questions, getting the debate too early, just allowing people to really soak in the stats they were seeing. So we had the university come to speak, who gave a lot of detail about the poverty statistics in the city. Citizens Advice said the sort of issues they were hearing about. And then we had all the food stats as well that was coming through from charities. So there was a lot of new information for anyone. And what we'd learned from the Rough Sleeping conference 5 years ago is, even if this is your number one subject, most people don't know what's going on in their city. They're oblivious to everything happening apart from in their own patch. Do you know what I mean? that they know what's happening, what they're doing, but they haven't really taken the time to find out what other people are doing. And so that networking that we probably take for granted, people on this Zoom call, that's not the norm for most people. Even during COVID, we got all the debt agencies together and just say, right, let's look at the capacity. And it was the first time the chief execs had ever been together in Southampton. We're not a massive city. Do you know what I mean? It's doable for people to connect, but quite often they just stay within their own organizations. The second thing is that they don't argue. And then the third thing is, you know, and we've all been there, that you spend a day where you talk and talk and talk, and you wonder, has anything actually come out of this? Because if you've just got a lot of well-paid people spending a day listening and talking, it's a waste of money. So really setting ourselves towards action, bringing some facilitators in to do that does work well. And then if people see in 3 months' time, right, we have done this, we have done that, then it builds a momentum. And we found that so we've run 7 rough sleeping conferences now since 2018. So we've just kept that momentum going, but every time people are keen to connect. I'll wrap up, but I think the things that we found made those summits work well is having some strong keynotes. I think some of you may have seen Dr. Diana Smith, who's really strong on this food poverty deserts. She spoke at the conference. She was our first speaker, having the current stats and then having some individual stories, both in terms of rough sleeping, but also in terms of this cost of living, some real stories. So it's not just stats on the page, but it's real stories. And so we hired a researcher for Love Southampton who's worked through the last 6 months just gathering conversations, collecting conversations with people who are using the marketplaces, food banks, community pantries, and what it means for them to have that. And so just a bank of 10 or 12 of those quotes are really powerful in terms of people seeing the urgency that say, you know, when people say all I've got in my cupboard is cornflakes, that sort of thing. And then people that have got the ability or budgets to make things happen, they see that they could make a real difference as well. And lastly, I think just that accountability meeting, that sort of real sense of urgency and action about it all. The other thing we created off the back of that, I don't know if you've seen it, but we asked all the charities to measure how many meals they were giving out during a week. So it was difficult because even during the first summit, people were talking about the kilograms of food or the bags of food or the households that are helping other people. And I don't know if you remember simultaneous equations at school, but you got so many variables, you don't actually know what you're talking about. So we said, well, let's pick a variable, let's go for meals. And then even if you're giving out a bag, you can work out roughly if that's 4 meals, 5 meals, or 10 meals that's there. And so we'll take it back to that sort of one variable. And off the back of that, then we measured that 17,000 meals went out from the charities in 1 week. And then if you multiply that by 52, that gives you nearly 1 million meals in a year. And then it becomes quite a headline figure. ITV News picked up on it straight away and then wanted to run a news piece around that for cost of living, but also about what the churches were doing. But it took just a lot of just careful thought just to push people towards the one variable. And then for people we had something like 32 organizations involved in that gave their statistics towards doing a food census in the city. And it now gives us a snapshot that we can go back to in years to come. So I think the plan now would be to do an annual food census, as it were, as to how things are doing. Very biblical to do a food census at Christmas. So that's us. Lastly, we're just going to create a report. So we had some money from the Department for Levelling Up, just where we're able to, our research could interview some of the leads from the local authority, from some of the key organizations like health and so on, about how they found working with Love Southampton. So we're creating a report on there. It's in draft format at the moment, but we hope to launch that as a sort of all-party parliamentary report in the spring, which will go out to all the other local authorities about how we've worked together. So that's me. Thanks for listening patiently to my 10-year story.
Mark, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry, everybody. Paul, thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. 10 years and 15 minutes. That's Yeah, a real blessing. Now we want to dig into more of your wisdom as well. So I want to ask everybody just to think maybe about a question that they might have for Paul as we think about collaboration and particularly the church, not just connecting with other churches, but with cross-sector organizations. Paul's got a huge amount of experience that we can draw on here. So if you maybe just have a think about a question. I've gone back to this slide again just to point out that collaboration sits alongside some other foundations for church unity, one of which is relationships. And I think we got some of that from what Paul was saying, that actually there's a big backstory here about building relationships with leaders across the community, including the CEO and other agencies, as well as with church leaders. And clearly there are structures that are needed for this kind of work, not only churches with governance structures, but actually that event that you got leaders together for 24 hours. We sometimes call that an engagement activity. We're not thinking specifically about delivering or carrying on what we're delivering already in the community. It's an engagement activity where we get people in the room who can help us think through a best strategy of collaboration. And yeah, that's needs relationships and prayer, actually, doesn't it? Prayer is another one of our foundations as we come to an event like that, that God would show us and inspire us about what we can do together. So over to you, I think now, everybody. If has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask Paul about cross-sector collaboration? Put your hand up, or physically or virtually, and come in. Alison. Oh, Alison and Nigel. Let's go with you first, Alison. If you've got anything to ask Paul.
Hiya. Yeah, I was just interested in like who it was within your unity movement or your network who initiated that idea originally, to get everyone together for the I think it was the rough sleepers one first, and what kind of resource did you need to draw on to do that? Who provided that? Was it just you? Did you have people, a team to help you, and how did you gather that team? So yeah, around that resource and who initiated.
Yeah, I'm not a huge team for the first one, probably, but we brought in as a guy called Simon Thomas from City to City, who helped us think through the format for that street rough sleeping conference. So I damaged my knee that year, so I was sat at home for a couple of weeks. So that's all I did. I thought about the conference and I was grounded for a couple of weeks. So I got it done. And then this one, with Love Southampton now, I think we know that we need some core staff in there, not huge, but like at least someone part-time, and then a couple of other church people that we can draw in for these conferences. So maybe the last thing that we've got maybe 5 members of staff that are there for the day. And that I thought through the program for that, but you need people to capture like photographs and capture the story of it as well, don't you? We use the phrase voice catalyst network with Love Southampton. So the voice element is about speaking with the local authority, but also telling the stories of the church. And it's that storytelling thing I think we sometimes don't do well as churches. We sort of hide our light under a bushel, as someone famous once said. But putting the stories out there more widely help us. And then I think what we've also done is when we tell those stories is put not ourselves center stage. So it's not Paul Woodman did this, Paul Woodman did that, but it's like, this is what Satford Core from the council did, this is what so-and-so did. So we wrote loads of stories. You'll see them on the Love Southampton website, which is about the leader of No Limits, is our big youth charity down here, and what she said at the conference, quoting her, and so she becomes the main star of that part of the conference rather than us. And I think that's what builds engagement as well. You're giving people that platform only. So does that help? York's beautiful, by the way. I love York. It's a nice place.
Yeah, it's a good place. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Thanks.
Nigel, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. So Paul, we know each other, and thank you for the lovely ring of authenticity through everything you've shared today. I just wondered about how you find time for all of this, because I'm not sure how many church leaders there are in this Zoom room. And wherever the collection is, many church leaders would say they don't have time for this kind of thing, even though they would like to. So how do you manage it?
Yeah, I don't know. And it probably, like other people tell me now, it's best not to think about what Paul Woodman does, but think about one thing that he does and then try and replicate that one thing and then find someone else to do another thing. I'm not being proud, but I'm just, I've got quite a high capacity. Most of you have. I know you lot as well. I think like one thing I do is like I carve out Thursday mornings, early Thursday morning, and I just offer to meet people one-to-one quite often on a Thursday. So through a year, I probably see 40 or 50 people. A lot of them are leaders of services in the council. So I just offer to see them at 8 a.m. or whatever for coffee. And so like just before Christmas, I saw the service lead for housing, went out for coffee with her. And sometimes I meet church leaders, but I think we may have slipped up. I don't know how you found it. It may have just slipped in terms of our networking one-to-one with people. So now that's what I do on Thursday. And it does mean that when you get together in a conference, you've spent an hour with someone and they feel there's trust there, and you're not trying to get to know them while you're leading a conference. You know, they're doing their part, but they'd be quite keen to feel, they would feel connected when they come in. And so with my team down here, that's what I'm encouraging people to do, is just like get breakfast in with people every week and just build that in. And probably, well, and I got told off years ago, like too many church leaders spend too much time in the church building. And so I'm hardly ever in there, but I'm unusual. So.
Thanks.
Nigel and I work together on Hong Kong business, which is fun.
Great. Catherine Barker, can we share your question?
Thank you. Paul, that was really interesting. Thank you. I'm coming to this meeting with my Family Hubs hat on. So I belong to a church in Dorking in Surrey, but I'm particularly interested today about Family Hubs. And I don't want to sidetrack from that or expect anyone to have any knowledge about it. But the key thing about Family Hubs is about local churches working in better partnership with the local authority. And I'm really fascinated by your great relationship with Southampton Council. And I wondered what tips you would give people who are working in churches who are trying to form better relationships with their local authority, whether they're running stay and play groups in their church, whether they're doing food banks, or whether they're looking to do more specific family support work with families in local social housing, for example. What your advice would be for them to be able to connect up with the relevant teams in the local authority, not just the leaders.
Yeah, and we've had some conversations around that in Southampton with Mark as well, around the Family Hubs, which we're hopeful will go somewhere. But I don't know, I think one of the things that I notice anyway, so I go to a lot of civic events when they're happening, and I don't see many other church leaders there. So, you know, things like remembrance. We had, when Safe Homes Children was being introduced in Southampton, it didn't get off to a good start. It was turned down by the council as a church initiative they didn't want anything to do with. But then the Bishop of Southampton spoke with the leader of the council at Remembrance and changed their minds. So sometimes just being at those events, so when there's a prayer event or a Ukraine support event, or there's something being run by the council. Last week we had a Southampton City of Culture. We failed in that bid, Bradford won, but we had a launch of the new charity there. Again, look around the room, there's 300 people in the room from Southampton. No, there's just me from the churches there. So it's not a judgment, it's just like that people just don't have, they have their church diaries, but they don't have a city diary. So knowing what's going on in the city and turning out to some library event or some peace event or some culture event makes a massive difference. So I'm at all those events. So every time I get chatting to different people, and it makes a big difference, like, because we're just seen in the city at different different things. I can't think of other things that, and then just meeting up with, asking to meet up with them. And then so we met up with the leader of the council 2 weeks ago just to review how we got with the cost of living summit, and again that was organised within no time to do it. And so building those links just takes time, and probably we're not reaping a lot from those relationships because we don't put a lot of our own time into it.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
A few nods around the room there.
What we can say around the country from the Gather movement side is that we are seeing so many doors open to starting conversations with our civic leaders and civic authorities. And actually it takes a bit of inspiration, which I think Paul has definitely given us today, and then some boldness. So yeah, I mean, we've just seen in Cambridge in the last couple of weeks, church leaders who traditionally haven't been very good at getting together now have agreed to get together every term, senior church leaders. And there was over 50 in the room to meet the CEO of the council. So I think one tip is if you can get the CEO of the council to come along and use that as a bit of a platform to beat the drum and say, actually, our civic leaders need a gateway to speak to the church in their area. That was particularly successful in Cambridge, and we're finding that message in other local authorities is being effective too, that we need to get together so our civic leaders can speak to us as a whole. And just another example of that, you may have heard of Church Works Commission, which is where the 15 major UK denominations, Christian denominations, have been brought together under one committee. They engage with government and work together with their denominations. Warm Welcome Project has come out of that, and they're also working on family hubs and other things as well. So yeah, it is happening. We're seeing that collective action of churches getting together at a national level, but also at a local authority level, and our civic leaders can be a bit of a driver for that. So I want to encourage you to do that. Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you again, Paul. And the question was really about the fact that you're having this talk before the report comes out, but you've seen the report. What early information can you give us from it that we can glean while you're able to just talk to that, so that we can have a heads up?
Yeah, it's the nice thing about having someone independent do the report is that they can, when they do the interviews, people can be quite real about the situation. And what the overriding theme, one of the overriding themes has been about trust, and particularly how that was built during COVID. I think Faith Action had a similar report about the level of trust between local authorities and faith groups rising during that time. But that was a big theme. But at least 3 of the leaders that were interviewed talked about the fact they'd had coffee with us one-to-one. They got a chance to know us a bit better and know our motivation. So that sort of networking did pay off. It's coming through in those interviews. I think going back to your question, Catherine, as well, I think the bishops they get invited to all these public events. I don't get invited to hardly any, but the bishops get invited to a lot. And I think we learned, probably is around 10 years ago as well, that there was no point us trying to do things without the bishop being on board, because they just have different openings to us and different relationships. And they'll be in Southampton, they'll be invited, for example, to go and bless the ships every couple of weeks. That's part of what they do in Southampton. So all the civic leaders go to that while the bishop's there blessing the ship. I don't know what would happen if it wasn't blessed, but it's things like that. The bishops just have an inroad that we don't have, and so we work really closely with the bishop's office here in Southampton, just making sure that works. Does that answer the question?
I think it's also just in terms of what have you learned that we can implement at a local level to help with cost of living crisis? Are there things that surprised you that came out of the conversations in the report where these were key nuggets that you were surprised by?
I think, well, the scale of the need for us, even though we've been around for a long time, I think we were expecting the numbers being fed to be about 3,000 a month, and it's more like 6,000 a month. So that's a big shock to everyone. And then sometimes you wonder whether you're creating demand. Do you ever feel like that? Maybe I've created demand by making food more accessible, by having a marketplace in every corner of the town. Have I just made it easier for people to do that? So getting those end user stories about what difference it's made to their lives, that as well has been strong. And I think, I don't know if you agree, but sometimes that's the missing element for us as churches. We have a lot of time put into the volunteers. We produce a lot of output, but that impact report, that final outcomes thing, we very rarely bother to do it. So that's what we've been funded to do. And I think the reason why we got that funding is because we promised to do that end impact part. And if we could build more of that into what we do, probably finding the funding would be easier if we can categorically say this family just had cornflakes in their cupboard. But we've given them this food for £5 and this is what it's meant to them, and then a quote from them. I'm not trying to lever any situation, but it's just sometimes, you know, are we giving out food and then people just putting it in the bin or because they don't want it, or do they really, really need it? And that's probably true of all the projects we run. We don't do that sort of end outcome stuff very well. So lastly, if you haven't come across theory of change, that's what I've been working on, is the theory of change, like what goes into our projects, what our system is in the middle, and then what comes out at the end of it. And so even from that first summit that we did around cost of living, as everyone's speaking from the different projects, I'm thinking it's so confused what they're saying. Even I'm not sure what you're saying. I've been friends with you for 20 years. And so, but having a one-page summary of this is what we do and this is what comes out at the end of it, you know, in terms of number of meals, the impact for a person's household, etc. If you can get that on one page, it becomes really powerful as a sort of conversation, as a way of presenting to local authority and also for funders. Yeah, sorry. So Google theory of change if you've never used it. It's helpful for charities. Trust I got one. Sorry, I'll stop.
Steve Prince, come in.
Hi, Paul. Sort of sorry for your footballing pain, but not totally. But just intrigued, your Thursday diary, sort of networking and seeing people. Does that include seeing church leaders as well and encouraging them to participate more in the story?
Yeah, I do. And so, we just a couple of weeks ago, we had all the church leaders together in Southampton, first time in 2 or 3 years. And I do work hard on this. So I've sort of, if someone moves into town, I'll do an unofficial induction with them to chat them through how things run. And then, so I've done that with so many of the people over the last 2 years, whereas most church leaders, even though they've been here maybe even longer, you know, been here a long time, they're looking around the room, they don't know who everyone is. They probably don't know a third of the people in the room. So yeah, just, and also I tell the church leaders that I've always got my Thursdays free. If you ever want to catch up with me, just say, so people do, they're like, oh, when's your next Thursday? And then catch up. So it's nice. And I think that can, we've just lost a bit of that. I think we were doing it really well, weren't we, before 2020, and then it just got knocked out. But yeah, I think it's useful to do with church leaders and then also with the council and other people. But I like just having that spot. And if it's blank, I'm lost. I don't know what to do on a Thursday now. So
Great, well done.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve, do you want to just introduce yourself as a connector? Is that appropriate at this point?
Yeah, doing connecting from Reading into supporting a number of towns and cities around our kind of area. And we're just like you just said, Paul, recovering post lockdowns and everything else, and rebuilding the church leadership connections. I think the charity and organisation leaders are really firing on all cylinders and exploiting the opportunities. We just need the churches to back them up more now, really. So I'm probably going to be working a day a week to do some of that in the not too distant future in Reading, which hopefully will help.
Yeah, great. Well, it's great having Steve, connecting with Steve more on this Gather movement. So thanks, Steve. Great to have you today. And Steve Botham as well. I didn't introduce you earlier. Steve's part of the Gather team as well. So Steve, I see you've got a question.
Yeah, I've plagiarised ruthlessly from Paul and love what they've done in Southampton. And we did an event in Birmingham with church leaders in November. And I think the thing that made the most impact, and I say we'd stolen it completely from Southampton, was the raising awareness. So you start to talk about how many people are in rent arrears, how many people are not picking up their benefits, where the key areas of, I mean, you've got some really fantastic things in terms of, and this neighbourhood is particularly vulnerable, and this neighbourhood is particularly struggling, and that whole thing of raising awareness, certainly in Birmingham, actually it was particularly amongst a lot of the black church leaders, were going, wow, and people going, we're at a tipping point, aren't we? We're either relevant as church or we're not relevant. So I just wondered, you present, as you presented a lot of information to church leaders and others. I mean, often the leadership and drive is not just coming from church leaders. What was the response to that, and what would you hope to see build on that in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, there were some shocking things. I think we had one story of old people that they knew they were being scammed on the telephone, but it's the first person they'd been spoken to for months. So they carried on talking to the person who they knew was financial scamming just so they weren't lonely, which was a shocking story. I think we also had the figure came through from both the food banks and the university that there were 18,000 homes with negative budgets now, which meant they're spending more than they're getting in. No one imagined it would be that high coming through. And then stories around debt, that the debt agency was saying this is the first time when they've reorganized people's finances, more and more they're finding there's not a £10 a week left to try and reorganize a loan, that there is no money left, that people are genuinely broke. And so all of that was like, as you say, like a shot to the heart, right? What are we going to do? Jumpstart and get going. It jumped a lot of people into action. So one of the pledges was to get a warm space open in every postcode every day of the week within that 3-month period, which we did, but it took some real energy to do that. So yeah, raising awareness. There was also some anger around the sort of dynamic shopping. I don't know if you've seen that. So the research, Diana talks about how she bought some supermarket shopping items in one area, went somewhere else where it's all just a small convenience stores and it's twice the price. It's just, I went to one of these places yesterday and it was for a 200 grams of coffee was £7.50 for 200 grams of coffee. Like, that can't be right. But in the bigger stores, it's much cheaper. But in the smaller stores where people go if they haven't got a car and they're not mobile, that's where they end up shopping. So I think all of that stuff, and so there was a pledge from the local authority to put pressure on the supermarkets, etc., around that dynamic shopping, and they can do that through the Chamber of Commerce was the plan. But yeah, I mean, it jolted us into action for the church then, writing up the stories of those things, retelling those stories. And our website hits have gone up substantially since we ran that summit, and we started running regular stories going through off the back of that. Is that right, Steve?
Well, part of the collaboration then is, and has that led to more collaboration on things like food banks? You're talking about warm spaces, money support. What sort of practical on the ground things are you seeing in terms of collaboration within local areas?
Yeah, so those, around food and debt. So there was good collaboration, and the warm space. They're the three. You use that Maslow triangle, don't you? They're the three basics around there. So again, just getting some common language across the food charities, that was helpful. It's helped all of them. Working with them on their theory of change, that will help them. And then being able to trumpet their warehouse needs, volunteer needs, has been really good. And the local paper as well has engaged with us in terms of, they call it Boost the Bank, is their campaign, Boost the Food Bank. So they've been working with us actively through that. So there's not been anything negative that comes. Honestly, I thought the summit was a bit poor in places, because we're just a bit rusty. Like, I haven't run a conference for a few years. I was scratching my head at the coffee queue and the line coming in. I'm like, I'm sure we used to do this better. But the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. I think people just enjoy being together. And then that jolt forwards. I know things like the warm spaces wouldn't have accelerated as well without that. There's an ongoing conversation just around warehouse space and whether we can get some of the bigger businesses in Southampton to provide that rather than us fund it ourselves. And then understanding that core cost of what the food network, I don't know if you've done that in your cities, but how much it costs to run food provision in your city, then how much food is needed. The other thing that's come out of it is we're just doing a lot more work around scoping for food further afield. So, you know, a lot of the farms plough vegetables back into the ground now. We're just travelling out to the farms in Sussex and Surrey. Maybe we won't tread on your toes in Dorking, I promise, but just a bit further afield and just seeing if we can get fresh fruit and veg. And that's yielded quite a few £1,000s worth of fresh goods coming in, which is obviously, that's the thing that you normally have to pay for in marketplaces and community pantries. So we're getting it for free from the farms and they're not needing to plough it back into the ground.
Brilliant. Paul, you were very kind letting me come along to the Cost of Living Summit in Southampton. I was totally inspired by it. And the workshops in the afternoon were, again, amazing because I sat on a round table with a dozen people. There were councillors, there were officers from the local authority, there were church leaders, there were third sector leaders. And it really felt the discussions around that table that we together, we could see the whole picture. And that was particularly inspiring for me as a church leader. And you were saying actually that universities are open to, these kind of events. Do you want to just explain why that is?
Yeah, I don't know if you're working with universities already, but I've only learned this through this past year is that they're now, you know, the way they're rated and ranked as universities, they're now part of their scoring is based on the impact they have on their local community. So this is a recent thing. So they're also scored on things like their teaching, their research, the student experience, but this community impact is now a big factor. So if you want a research program, you would need to demonstrate in your research proposal how it's going to make an impact on the local community. Now, if you're making fiber optic cables or something, then you can say, yeah, this will make a difference because, you know, this will be so much faster, etc., etc. So for engineering, it's probably quite easy. But for some of the other departments like social sciences, psychology, geography, etc., it's much more difficult for them to say what their impact is going to be based on the work they do. So I'm finding increasingly I'm getting emails from universities saying they want to work with us and they want to work with us on the impact of work around rough sleeping, homelessness. And they've been offering us money as well, just small amounts of money, about £7,000 to work with us on research programs. I even had one email where I was copied into where a researcher was told, well, you can't do this work on anti-smoking unless you work with Paul Woodman. So it's like, I don't do any work with anti-smoking, but it's because of this community impact that they need. So now we've decided to refuse all those small amounts of money. You can do as you wish. And then we've gone further up the university chain to like this group that's in charge of how that community impact is measured. They're called Public Policy Department in Southampton, and meeting with them directly to talk about, you know, how we do this across the whole city. And their budget is probably more like 2.5 million. So the 7,000 is nothing comparatively compared to the money they have for this program. So I just encourage everyone like to look into that, to look into what, so every university has the same deal. Obviously, if you've got a bigger research department, which somewhere like Southampton, York would have, Reading no doubt would have, then this would be a big thing for them. For us, we've got Solent, which is a smaller teaching university, so they wouldn't have anywhere near that budget. But even so, they hosted the event for free for us in October, and they host all sorts of things for us for free. And I'm engaged with Solent all the time. They still have to show how it's called their civic contract. They have to show the difference they're making to their hometown. So they're still engaged. But for us, it's the Russell Group ones that have got a lot more money around research for this. So that's just worth looking into and worth developing that partnership with them. And I think with the local authority as well, going back to your point about the round tables, you know, we provide this cross-sector approach, but quite often their service leads don't have it at all. They're mixing all the time with other people in the council, and their life is dodging political bullets. Do you know what I mean? That's how they live. They've got to try and work out how they get the things done with the bureaucracy and the politics that are there. Whereas quite often the business people, the arts people, the church people, we're more pragmatic and we can get things done quickly. Even so simple thing of trying to buy a paperclip in the local authority is going to take you seven or eight pieces of paper. Whereas you and I could probably buy it on our cards and get a quick claim back on our church. So it's not like that in the local authorities. They've got huge bureaucracy to go through. So our church literally gets hundreds of thousands of pounds now from the local authority every year, just money that we can spend quicker than they can spend. Sounds like I'm money laundering, but I'm not. It's helping people. But we can do it quickly, and they need purchase orders and they need supplier approval forms. You know how it is to get it all done. And we can do it in a day, and they know it will take them a couple of months to do. So there are reasons why they want to work with us. It's not just because Jesus has shone a light on them. It's because we can do things quicker and easier and better often than they can.
That's so helpful. So helpful. Okay, I saw you had your hand up. Have you got a question?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't sure if we're running out of time. So very quickly, Paul, you've mentioned a few times that you've hired a researcher, and it seems to me that that research and those stats were really crucial to what you've been doing. And I just wondered if you could just very quickly talk us through how you went about hiring a researcher and the process that you went through with the researcher.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. So this is one of the hardest things about the project I had to do, because we'd lined it up with an organization, but then they had a change of personnel, which is happening a lot at the moment, isn't it? So that fell through. And then this is before the universities were being scored so highly on their community engagement. I asked the university people that I knew, and they turned us down. So that's partly why we're playing a bit more hardball now about our contract with them, because now they're desperate to work with us. But now I've gone with just a management consultant team. So I've just hired someone on a short-term contract to do this piece of work, who's got that writing skills, and they've done a great job. So it was a bit of a risk in terms of that management consultant, but it's worked out well. So they're actually from Reading, so they're coming down from Reading to do it for us. Yeah, so ideally, I think we'd work with the universities. What we'll probably do, part of our deal next week with the universities, hopefully, is they can take hold of the report that the management consultant's done, and they can they can authenticate it from their research point of view and just put some academic finery to it. But we've had to be careful not to call it research, because obviously research, you've got to do ethics and all of that. And so we've done an impact report that will be made public soon.
Amazing. Well, we'll keep in touch with what's going on in Southampton, and certainly produce updates through our newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for that, do go to our website and do that, so you can get all the latest news. But equally, I'm sure you're welcome to contact Paul directly for any updates that you might need, or his wisdom. We're coming towards the end of our time, but I just want to show you one other thing, if I may. As we think about collaborating, we found that mapping some of this, what the church can do, is extremely important. This is just a little example of an Excel template that was done around food provision across the churches in a local authority. We've done this in Bolton. We've had about 120 churches that are down this left-hand column with their contact details, and then we asked them 12 questions about food provision. The nice thing about this is it's the same 12 questions that were used for the whole food action network across Greater Manchester. So it's not just churches filling in these questions, it's also other organisations that provide food. And this has been really helpful as it's been rolled up to the combined authority. We have a Metro Mayor for Greater Manchester who we can then provide this data to. And we have templates like this on food provision, on mental health, and on family hubs. And so if you'd like a template like this, just to start you off so that you can collect data about what your churches are doing, it's a really powerful tool to then take to your civic leaders and say, we've got a map here of all the assets that the church delivers across this local authority. And once you've got that information, it's very easy to put it into a geographical information system. So, for example, in Bolton, we can now show you where all those 120 churches' buildings are. and we can also rag them so that we can turn them red, amber or green, depending on how much they're doing in these different areas. And we can start to overlay this with some maps around food deprivation or children on free school meals or whatever, sort of demographic or statistic that we want to look at. And again, universities can partner with us in some of this activity. So yeah, just an example of actually some tools to engage with collaboration with civic authorities. If you'd like to any of this or would like to talk more, then please do get in touch with Gather and we can help you through this. And then just finally, I've used this word already today, but this idea of an engagement vehicle and a delivery vehicle. There are these two different elements of work that we believe need to happen in collaboration, particularly with the civic authorities, but equally it can be true with a wider network that includes other charities or even private businesses. This engagement work that you see in the top picture there includes the council, the private, the public, and the community voluntary sector. Together, they do need to talk about what's the best way to impact our communities. It's all very well the church doing its thing, but actually we can make a greater impact if we collaborate together. And that engagement work requires some networking. Paul's given us some great insights into that. But Gather, again, is able to provide some teaching and training to church leaders in this area. And then the other side of it is then the delivery around food, well-being, whatever it be. And you need churches on the ground across your area that are going to do that. But ideally, it needs to be coordinated by the engagement vehicle, engaging with the other sectors. So if you'd like to explore more of that, do get in touch. But those are just some ideas to help your conversation and thinking in this area.